thank you everybody for joining today. I love seeing so many of you here and so excited for our chat today. We have a wonderful lineup of course. And I just want to take an opportunity to thank all our family caregivers for taking the time to join us right now. I know how precious your time is and just making time to be here right now. Just truly grateful. Thank you. Hope you love the chat today. So who am I? In case you don't know, my name's Amy Barger. I am the community manager at caregiving.com. And I've been coordinating the care chat for the past few months. And so today's topic is about financial stress. And as I mentioned, we have an amazing panel here that's going to help you make, help guide you and give you some tools for managing your own financial situations and stress. So, with that, I'm happy to introduce, let's first go with the Voya team. So, we have Jessica Tuman, who is the Vice President of Voya Cares. So, hello. And then we've also got Matt Stagner, who is a Senior Special Needs Financial Consultant at Voya. And we've got Karen Laverier Sanchez, who is the Voya Cares Sales Engagement Consultant. And a little background on Voya and Voya Cares. So Voya Cares is a program offered by Voya Financial, and they are really focused on delivering special needs planning resources in order to advance the financial well-being of those with special needs and their caregivers. And this is such a fantastic program. We loved it so much that here at caregiving.com, we honored Voya with the 2020 Caregiving Visionary Awards ceremony honoring them for Organization of the Year. So happy to have you here. And we are so grateful for this program that you offer to family caregivers, within your organization and outside of it. So you're definitely a valued friend of ours. And then next we have Amanda Singleton, who is an attorney, caregiver advocate, and she writes for AARP as a family caregiving expert. And she was also the recipient of the Caregiving Visionary Award in 2018. So we got, some famous, in our world, famous award recipients here for the CVA. So it's an honor to have you here, and welcome, Amanda. And Amanda's story, she has, a unique story, but something that we can all relate to. At the age of 30 is when her caregiving journey started. She cared for her mother diagnosed with cancer in 2010. So she's been in the neck of the woods for a while now, and she's been caring for various other family members and loved ones. And it's forced her to make some difficult financial decisions in that journey. So she's going to talk about that today. And thank you for opening up about your story, Amanda. And you've shared about it on AARP as well. And at the end of this discussion, we'll have resources from everybody here on our panel. So you can learn a little bit more about Amanda and Voya Cares and what caregiving.com has to offer. So look out for that in the chat. I will share that later on. So without further ado, let's start our discussion. So how this will work. If you're not familiar with Care Chat, it started off on Twitter for the past decade or so. And so we decided to transition into Zoom. So you have a more intimate way of engaging with the experts in our conversations here. And so we are excited we just started this transition. So we're really excited about this, and we've heard great things. So we will keep at it. So, and so as far as the discussion goes, everybody, our family caregivers, our participants here today will have an opportunity to ask their questions at the end. And we will start off with a presentation, and we'll go from there. So why don't we get started, since our hour goes by so fast. We're doing pretty good, 12:07. That's really awesome. So, all right, let's get started. So we have a presentation. Let me share my screen. Here we go. Everybody see the screen okay? You should see care chat popped up. Great, great. All right. So today, like I said, we're going to discuss about financial strain and relieving that stress. But before we get started, let's just talk about to getting into that portion. Let's talk about the state of financial and employment of family caregivers. So Voya is here to help us understand that today. Um, So, some research from Voya, they indicate caregivers report a higher likelihood of being impacted by job loss or having their hours cut back, which I'm sure many of you can relate. So, 1 in 5 said they experienced difficulty meeting the financial needs related to providing special care for their family member. So, wow, I mean, this is a common experience. Um, Karen from Voya, she's going to take over to, I didn't make sure I didn't go too far. There we go. She's going to take over and explain a little bit more about their research, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you. Really quickly, we know that 1 in 5 Americans are caregivers. And so we also know then that translates into the workplace. And we wanted to understand a little bit more about caregiving and caregivers in the workplace. So what we found was that compared to the general population of employees, caregivers and employees with disabilities, both, are in a more uncertain financial situation. 65% of employees with disabilities and 57% of caregivers surveyed are concerned that the money they have or the money they will save won't last. By comparison, only 39% of the general population feels the same way. Employees with disabilities and caregivers also are more likely to live paycheck to paycheck and just get by financially. Caregivers report that their caregiving expenses add up significantly. They say they spend $825 per month on average on things like medical expenses, home essentials, equipment, legal fees, and all those others that all those other expenses that pop up. To make ends meet, to make sure that their loved ones receive the proper resources, caregivers report that they have to make a number of financial sacrifices, and therefore they cut back on things like personal travel, vacation. They eliminate hobbies and other leisure activities, and they delay major purchases, such as a car, a home, or home improvement projects. The most important sacrifice, from our perspective, Voya, what we do is we help people retire well. So from our perspective, they are also making the sacrifice of their retirement. 30% of caregiving employees say they've taken a hardship loan out from their retirement savings since they've begun providing care. Amy, if you could jump to the next slide, we'll continue on. So a further financial toll is realized when caregivers work and their careers are affected by either cutting back on hours or changing jobs. 1 in 5 caregivers reported that they had to quit work entirely as a result of caregiving responsibilities. And that can be very serious. That can lead to more than $300,000 in lost wages, Social Security, and pension benefits over the lifetime of a typical caregiver age 50 or older who left the workforce early to care for a parent. And that's according to a 2019 Kiplinger's article. So, I mean, we can see that this is very, very serious. So I'll kick it back to Amy.
Yeah, crazy numbers, and I mean, surprising and not surprising at the same time is how I feel. I mean, this is the stories we're seeing from caregivers all the time, social media, news outlets, they're all talking about the financial struggle of family caregivers right now, and appreciate this research from Voya to just further confirm that. So with that, I mean, if any of that sounded like you, it's really important for you to understand you are not alone. And we are all here, from Voya to caregiving.com. We're all here to, we're here for you. We're don't want to make it sound like a battleground, but we are fighting for you. We are here for you every day, trying to better your situation, and just know that we're here and there's many like you. So an example, we have Amanda here who has her own personal story, like I mentioned in the beginning, that I think many of you can relate to. So Amanda, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your caregiving journey and some of the financial hurdles that you ran into.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. And, when you said earlier, oh, Amanda's story is a little unique, yes, in the sense that I fit about a lifetime worth of caregiving into a decade. Just a lot has happened personally, but statistically, not unique at all. There are a lot of people like me out there, and I'm so fortunate to have the platform to talk about it. And so when I became a caregiver advocate, after having cared for my mother through cancer and going, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do, and nobody is sort of tapping me to say, like, we see that you're drowning and here's what's out there for you. When I became a caregiver advocate, I realized I'd have to be really authentic about the story that I tell, and that means telling everything, even if there's vulnerability to it. And financial struggles, I think, are one of the things that people keep so in-house. They keep them so quiet. Now caregivers have all of these wonderful spaces to say, this is hard and I'm not doing well with it. And that's great. But I feel like the financial piece is still a little bit, societally, we are conditioned to not talk about money woes. So just the opportunity to have this conversation is a gift. So my story is that my mother was suddenly diagnosed with cancer at the age of 60 years old. I was the adult child of divorced parents. And I had just really started out, just been married. My husband and I had bought a house that year. I was more the primary breadwinner in our house, and we just hadn't planned for caregiving. You don't think that you're going to do it, when your parents are just clearing out of their 50s. And it happened. And she was suddenly diagnosed with brain tumors. And then we were off and running 24-hour caregiving within a couple weeks. And so for a year plus, I took care of her. And I lost my job when my FMLA ran out. Every impact that you see in the studies, that you saw in Voya's research, that you see in AARP research and Merrill Lynch and Harvard Business School, all of these caregiver research studies that have been accumulating over the years, I experienced all of them, reduced savings, going into debt, losing a job, lost wages and benefits, all of that. My husband and I experienced. And I will say this, I felt so incredibly fortunate because I knew what was happening. And I knew I'm a young caregiver. I'm going to have a high financial impact, more than people who are, who have had their careers and they've saved up money. This is bigger to me. And it's really high intensity caregiving. It's 24 hours a day, big medical needs. I can't step away from this. That's going to create more financial strain because we had to buy more. My mom wanted to go into a nursing home for a little bit to try to relearn how to walk. That was private pay. And that's $7,000 to $10,000 a month. And not a lot of people who are 30 that I know had $7,000 to $10,000 a month lying around. So I was like, okay, I know I can get past this though. Even in that stint of caregiving and then future ones, I've caregiven for my spouse twice through incapacity. I always know that I have this extreme privilege of an education and that I can provide for myself no matter what. And I will get back on my feet. But all those impacts are there, and they will be for the rest of my life. So it's true that caregivers, a lot of us are out there who are living these experiences, and we should talk about them.
Wow. Thank you, Amanda. Wow, that it's pretty clear that you've had many struggle or hurdles to leap in your journey, and you started that, like you said, relatively young for most family caregivers. So thank you again for sharing your story. And then follow up to that, I know there's probably not just one thing that just like came to you where you're like, oh, enlightened, and now I have the answers to all my questions or all my troubles with finances. But was there something that happened or a few steps that you took that really made an impact that changed your situation? Are there any tools or resources that stick out to you that helped you through your journey?
That's a great question. And, you know, I've made so many missteps along the way, and, you know, we're just all learning. You know, nobody comes
Right.
with all the answers. And so enlightened, I don't know. Have I learned, and do I have any regrets? No. You know, just making the best decisions that you can at the time is all we can do. For me, one of my best steps was letting go of what life was supposed to look like my mental image of how it was supposed to be. The rigidity of thinking of where my spouse and I were supposed to be financially, that had to go really quickly. Before caregiving, we were okay. We could afford what we needed, absolutely, and even some things that we wanted. You know, we traveled, we were able to buy a house. You know, that's good stuff. And then all of a sudden, you know, the money's just going out the door for things, and then you can't. You know, and so I had to let go of what I thought life would be like in my 30s and 40s. And the joke is I had to learn how to budget and change perspective. And I tell my husband, I can make a penny cry. I can pinch it so well now. But that's valuable. I appreciate that I've had the experience. So that one step is just being able to be flexible and malleable in what your life is going to be, and recognizing that maybe it's going to be a little different than it was before caregiving. And how are you going to reach out for help? For me, I have the very good fortune of being married to a consumer debt advocate. He saw this thing coming a mile away because he works with people who are in debt all day, every day. And a lot of them are in debt because of medical bills and things like this. So he saw it and he flagged it to me. What had to change was my vision of our life, and letting go of that and finding out what tools could actually help us get right again.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I think that is the struggle, right? Is that you have this picture of how your life is going to go, especially at 30, and maybe you're trying to hang on to that and how it was meant to go, but then accepting the reality of what happened, and just how, like you said, being flexible and just going with it and just doing the best you can. That's great advice. Thank you. So how about, okay, now we'll turn it over to the Voya team, and let's see, let's get some solutions here, just like what Amanda was talking about. And I know the Voya team has been working on this for a while now, and has some great advice on how to move forward from situations like this. So Jessica Tuman, hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. So good to
Great.
be here.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for being here. So a question for you. So Voya, Karen mentioned earlier about special needs planning. So can you go in a little bit about what that is and how is it different from standard financial planning?
Yeah, I'll absolutely do that. And before I answer that question, I just want to say thank you to Amanda for sharing your story. And I think it's so hard when you're so young, having all these additional expenses. I think, we all expect to have these caregiving responsibilities when we're older, when our parents are older. So having made that journey at such a young age, I think that's inspiring. The fact that you told us that it was the right decision, because I know that you made the right decisions for your mom. So just kudos to you for that. One thing I will tell you, Amanda, is I think things have really changed. You mentioned your job. You lost your job. Perhaps you were reluctant to speak to your employer, your boss, your manager about your situation at home. This is the type of thing that we talk about all the time at Voya Cares. This is what we are trying to raise awareness around, is that employees, 1 in 5 employees, and obviously now with the COVID, with the pandemic, more and more employees are in this caregiving situation where they're taking care of, mom and dad from the nursing home, bringing them in home, or, a child at home as well. So caregiving has been really amplified by the pandemic. And one thing I will tell you is that I know that employers have had to react to this this last year than ever before. They've really stepped up. And I know this may not have been available to you when you were caring for your mom a few years ago. But I think, asking, self-identifying the fact that you are a caregiver opens up a lot of resources at your employer. Now we're seeing that employers like Voya and others, and, this is what we advocate for, is providing that flexibility, so that you can have a little bit more working from home space, or, if your FMLA runs out, then replacing you, Amanda, is very expensive. It's very, very expensive. That retention cost of employees is expensive for employers. So providing that flexibility, creating that sort of trusted environment is important. And now employers have lots and lots of solutions today. We see at Voya, I'm actually surprised at how many solutions employers provide. We look at our employers to provide our 401k, our retirement plans that we do at Voya, but also healthcare and dental and vision and all those other types of benefits. But more and more we're seeing employers provide backup care. So Bright Horizons is one of them. You might have heard of them. They provide backup care for your child or even aging parents now, any dependent really. And then the other types of solutions that we're seeing more and more are what we call caregiver concierge services. That are becoming more and more sort of prevalent, especially now, that provide for caregivers in the workplace, because it's hard for us to navigate like Social Security, all those government benefits, even insurance, health insurance. And if you've got someone on the phone who actually understands how to navigate these services and these organizations, it makes it so much easier for you. So I just wanted to sort of, react to that and just let you know that I think, there are resources available in the workplace, and that you should ask your HR manager or your supervisor on what is available, because you'll be surprised at the number of services and benefits that your employer provides, especially now during this pandemic. So just wanted to make mention of that. So thank you for sharing your story, Amanda. I really appreciate it. So in answering your question, Amy, that was a long-winded response to Amanda, but I wanted to just share that, because I think it's very important to understand and recognize what is available. But you asked the question, what is special needs planning? And this is what we do. Voya Cares is, we know that, if you are in a disability situation, if you are a caregiver, if you are have a disability yourself, you're taking care of a child with a special need, then your financial situation may be different. And you may need to save more. And this is something, again, we don't always talk about. This is not something that you plan for in traditional planning. So for example, the expenses associated with disabilities or caregiving might be expenses like making sure that your home is more accessible, and that's expensive. Assistive devices like, mobile or power wheelchairs are, can cost up to $65,000. The modified and accessible cars that you might need are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Medical therapies, caregiving, all the rest of it. Those are additional costs that you would have to consider when you are in a special needs situation. That's the big difference from the traditional financial planning that we talk about generally. And then in special needs planning or care, if you're a caregiver, you're planning for 2 lifetimes, your own lifetime and so the caregiver and the person receiving the care. So this could be months or decades after the caregiver passes away. And it really focuses on coordinating the assets available to you. It's not just your assets. It could be, family assets. An aunt or an uncle might have assets for your child with a disability or your loved one. The other thing that we always look at are the government benefits, what's available to you as what you're entitled to, what you're eligible for in terms of government benefits. I mentioned employee benefits, again, a fantastic and very rich source of benefits, very, very often overlooked. So what does your employer provide for you? Obviously, it's going to be different for every single employer. your personal assets, and then also the legal structures that you might need in place, like a special needs trust. So those are the types of things that are different from traditional planning that you would have to consider when you're in a disability situation or you're a caregiver taking care of someone as well.
Well, thank you for all that, Jessica. That's great. So as you dug in a little bit more about special needs planning, Matt, can you tell us a little bit more about what are some tools, some financial tools that you would recommend to help put together an effective special needs plan?
Sure, and I always start with a disclaimer that everybody's situation is a little bit different. So there's no one size fits all solution for everybody. I can't make a blanket recommendation and say, if you're a caregiver, if you buy this, you'll be in good shape. It's a little more complicated than that, unfortunately. And so to me, even before we think about the solution, one of the most important things is, if your situation allows for it, of course, is to plan ahead as far as you can. Start this process as soon as there's visibility, that you can start planning for. So the sooner you take action, the more likely some of these solutions will actually work. I know sometimes you're dropped into a situation and you don't have that luxury of planning, long into the future. But if it's available, certainly, don't put it off. Work with qualified professionals and really start that planning process as soon as possible. But Jessica mentioned sort of at least one of the foundational solutions that a lot of people associate with special needs and disability planning, and that's the special needs trust. There's actually a number of different types of trust available to people. If you work with a well-qualified, a specialist attorney in your area that has some experience with disability applications and appeals and trusts and estate planning, really specific to this community. I can't emphasize that enough. Not just any attorney will do it. You really need to work with somebody who's a specialist. But there are some things that you can do with trust to make sure that there are assets put aside for your loved one's quality of life long after you're gone, that will supplement instead of replacing those government benefits that are so important. So there's, again, a number of different trust solutions depending on your situation, your diagnosis, how much money we're talking about when it comes to planning ahead for future inheritances and things like that. But certainly a trust is often a big part of the solution. But it's certainly not the only part of the solution. And I think that's another lesson learned is I have worked with a lot of families who say, and I see Christine here, I know you've experienced the same, where somebody says, I've got a special needs trust, I'm all set, right? Everything's taken care of, I've got a trust. Great. That could be a very important part of the process, but there's a lot of other things that you may need to consider as well. So, a trust makes sure that there's a legal structure in place that allows your loved one or yourself to have those assets, still receive your government benefits, and have somebody help manage it, have a trustee that helps with that process by law. But there's a lot of other parts to that. You have to make sure there's an adequate amount of assets to fund that trust, and then you can do so without sacrificing your retirement goals, your other financial goals. There may be an insurance component where a lot of people will fund a trust with life insurance after they're gone to make sure that their loved one has what they need. So there's a legal structure. There's making sure there's money in place. Really, you've got to make sure that there's a person and the right people in place that can help with caregiving, especially as a caregiver. You have to think about that. And I know everybody here probably does, and I hear from caregivers all the time that a big worry is what happens if you're not there, or if you're not able to care for your loved one anymore. Who's going to do it? Will they know how to do that? Is there enough money there? Is there the legal authority? I mean, really, those are your four bases that you have to cover. And so there are things like the letter of intent, which we might talk a little bit more about or be able to share, which is a way for caregivers to document their instructions for care for the successor caregiver. Not only instructions for care, but also everything about your loved one that you would want someone else to know. And it really provides that continuity of care So nothing that you have to buy, nothing that you have to pay somebody to put together. It just really requires you as a caregiver to sit down and put things in writing, put it on paper, save it, share it with your family members, and you have a little bit more peace of mind knowing there's instructions there. So finally, without taking too much time, I want to touch on one other solution that we're big advocates of here at Voya, and those are ABLE accounts. So for those of you that are caring for a loved one with a disability or a special need that started prior to age 26, your loved one may be eligible for an ABLE account. And this is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's a tax advantaged savings and investment vehicle, very similar to a 529 plan for college. But an ABLE account can be used not only for education, but for just about anything related to the quality of life for your loved one. And it really provides that opportunity for people who qualify to have some extra money put aside, the tax benefits that we all get from things like Roth IRAs and HSAs that maybe people in the disabilities community have opted out of because of their government benefits. The ABLE account can give a person a feeling of independence, some access to their own money, even with their own debit card. So again, for those eligible individuals, that's a really innovative tool that's really gained some traction over the last few years. And we see a great application for ABLE accounts, not only for parents of young children to start saving for their future, but for working people with disabilities. It's a great place for you to save your paychecks and your excess money to make sure that you can still qualify for benefits, but also be saving and getting some tax benefits of your own. And it's a great way for very small gifts and things like that as well. So really planning ahead is the best solution if you have that opportunity, working with the right professionals, looking at different trust structures and potentially ABLE accounts as well.
Matt, that's great. No worries about how lengthy you got. I think that you explained everything beautifully, and so many nuggets of wisdom there that I think everybody can take away from today. So thank you for taking the time to explain that. And then you did touch a little bit about planning ahead, how important that is, and if you can or able to, I don't think it's ever too late to get organized or plan wherever you're at. But so Karen, would you explain, so how does someone get started with the special needs planning process? Where do you start?
Yeah, it can be a daunting process to get started with. I mean, so starting, I guess, kind of small helps. So we recommend two tools. One Matt touched on, and I'll get to that in a second. But the first one is a checklist. And a checklist kind of will take the steps that you need to take and kind of put them on your radar screen, help you prepare, help you gather what you're going to need so that you can put a plan together. And it will help you identify what you need, what resources you have, and what you need to bring to the table, or what you have to bring to the table. And the other one, which is actually a step on the checklist, and Matt talked about, is a letter of intent or an LOI. And that's a really far-reaching document. It's like a guidebook. So if someone needs to step, it actually does multiple things, but one of the things it does is if someone needs to step in as caregiver, and this doesn't mean that you're a caregiver of a young child and when you pass, someone's going to step in. You can be a caregiver of anyone, an aging family member. If you need to have elective surgery, for example, and it's short term, someone needs to step in. You move out of town and a sibling takes over care of an aging parent. You need to be able to have that person step in and not miss a beat, or not miss many beats. It's what you do is probably impossible to replicate immediately. So this letter of intent, or LOI for short, lays out everything that happens to care for the person you care for. And then the other thing that it does is provides a foundation for future planning. So it lays out your hopes, your dreams, and it's shared. It's not just the caregiver saying, this is what I want for the future. It's planning with the person who's being cared with and say, this is what I want for the future. I want my son to go to college, and my son wants to go to college. I want my son to live independently as he possibly can outside of the home, or, you know, whatever the future may be. So what that does then is it gives you that foundation to put a plan in place. It's a big document. It's probably a document that's never going to end, because you'll update and revise as you need. It's a living document. Living document is kind of what we call it. So those are really the two big documents that we recommend to get started. And both of those, Amy will be sending out resources at the end of the chat, and they will, oh yeah, there we go. There's a letter of intent Matt just sent out. So the resources that Amy sends out after will have an example of a checklist, an example of a letter of intent. We have a template. You can do your own, you know, just as long as you get all the material in there, and those will help you as well.
Karen brings up a good point about the letter of intent is a great place to start, because it doesn't necessarily cost you anything to do. It's something that you can, you know, work on in your spare time. You can build it piece by piece, you know, and it can be for any loved one. It could be an aging parent. It could be a sibling or a child. Really anybody that you're helping out with, and you want to make sure there's that continuity of care. It is a nice first step, and it can help you do things like isolate the cost of care. So you can go through the letter of intent, and it gives you that thought process of what are all the different steps that go along with caring for this loved one. What are their medications? What's the out-of-pocket cost? You know, where do they go for help? And it can really help guide that planning process, because the big question for a lot of people is, how much do we need to set aside, or how much do we need to plan for to care for our loved one? And I think a letter of intent is a pretty good place to start with that, along with a basic budget.
Yeah.
Amy,
Sorry,
we spent a lot of time. We spent months, probably a year, pulling this letter of intent together. It took a long time. So it's really I think it's really well done. It's a very consumable, you know, I think it's in PDF, you can fill it in. And it gives you all the guidelines around things that you might not necessarily think about as well when you're planning. So for example, you know, religion, the types of recreation you expect and envision for your loved one, the types of clothing, all these lifetime and lifestyle decisions that you don't always anticipate thinking through. So it's almost like a checklist as well. Again, you know, we put a lot of thought and energy around, you know, both those two things, the checklist and the letter of intent. So, you know, I would absolutely use that when you get an opportunity.
Yeah, great stuff. And yeah, like you said, it's a way to simplify things, right? If you just got this checklist in front of you, you know, and it's something you can visualize and see, and you see line per line what it is. I need to go down this list. I mean, it's perfect place to start. And as the Voya team mentioned there, Matt sent in some resources in the chat. And again, we'll have all the resources from everybody to offer to you at the end, where it's all in this one pretty doc, and you can go through and click through the links at your own time. But and I also want to point out Jerry in the chat. She shared an article that just came out today, worth looking into, on the New York Times, and it's called "Young Women Are Dropping Out of School and Work. Is Caregiving the Culprit?" So again, we're seeing more and more mainstream that everybody's talking about, you know, this link to caregiving and, you know, burnout and, you know, unemployment. So, you know, people are starting to open their eyes, and I think that's really hopeful. So now we're at the time of the conversation. We've got about a little less than 20 minutes, but we want to open up the discussion to our participants. So if you have any questions, if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine. If you have a question that you really want to ask any of the panel, go ahead and type it in the chat. Or if you want to be more vocal and show your face, and feel free to raise your hand as well, and I will make sure your question's asked. So go on for it. And if you have a specific question for someone in particular on our panel, mention their name if you can. Anybody? Any questions at all?
I have a comment. If I can go first while people are typing or thinking of theirs right now.
Sure.
Okay. Jessica, thank you for your kind words. I appreciated that. Two, with regard to caring for a loved one who you know has functional needs, and you're not sure how long, all of those tools are so excellent, but I encourage everyone to have conversations with the people in your circles, because you may be surprised where your future support may come from. I'll share anecdotally, my brother-in-law, Andrew, was high special needs. He was functionally about 2 years old, and he was not expected to live quite long at all. And he lived to be 44. And I'll never forget, a couple weeks before he passed away, unexpectedly, my father-in-law said, I never thought I'd be changing my child's diapers at 70. But there they were. And, my parents-in-law took care of Andrew at home every day of his life. And he was a two-person job for sure. So we cared for Andrew when they would go out of town. We were sort of part of their respite care team, right? And they'd, go on vacations, and they had wonderful programs and benefits that did provide caregivers for respite care and did allow Andrew to go to public school and to, he walked across the stage at a high school graduation, like really wonderful things. And they had to dig and fight kind of every step of the way from them, because they're a generation up from what's available now, a couple generations up. But they did their planning for him, and we didn't know that, but they did. And somewhere along the way, about 2015, I want to say, my husband looked at me and he said, my parents are getting older, and I don't know what their plan is for Drew. And I was like, well, why don't we just talk to them? And so we sat at their kitchen table and we said, we know you've done your wills and things, and we don't want to see them. That's not the conversation we're having. We just want to know what your plan for Andrew is. And they said, well, we've written it so that he will go to a place where he is cared for. And my husband could not bear that. He could not bear the thought of that. And he said, no, Amanda and I have talked about this. If anything happens, Andrew's coming home with us. And that completely floored my in-laws. They were like, are you prepared to bring that into your life? And we were like, yes. And this is, there was no question to us, but they wouldn't have known that. And I don't think they would have asked, so the conversations, I think are such an important part when you have caregiving in your sphere, because you never know who may offer to contribute.
Amanda, that's so important. Family, bringing the family into the conversation. We have a whole workshop on family meetings, and making sure that the family, who's on board with the family and who isn't on board, and they understand all of the constraints that might be in place if you're trying to keep income at a certain level to maintain government benefits. And all of a sudden grandma goes, hey, here's a, I cashed out my, whatever. And here's a nice big check for Johnny so you can help him out. But then Johnny gets kicked off Medicaid because of it. So it's so important to bring the family in. It's such a good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
I met with a family recently that had done a lot of this work, and they had communicated pretty well. But I threw out a couple of things about, do you know how much responsibility this is? And Amanda, is obviously, you and your husband are incredible for just having no reservations about that. But when it comes to being the trustee for somebody's trust, or being a guardian for someone who needs a guardian, I think it's really important for them to understand what's required. There's tax reporting. There may be reporting to the court. There may be filings for Social Security. There may be, a lot of administrative work that family members maybe aren't prepared for. So that was one of the more rewarding meetings I've had recently. Is we had a mother planning for her child, and she brought the whole team to the meeting, and we were all sitting on Zoom, and we just went around the room and we talked about what each person's role was going to be, what they should expect, what their responsibilities were going to be, and made sure that everybody was in agreement and prepared for that. And again, that's nothing, that costs them any extra to do. It's really just that communication and making sure that everybody knows what's expected and how to comply.
Great conversation. And I love the dialogue going on. And we do have a few questions in the chat. Christine Brookins, you have a question for Amanda. Would you like to ask it in the chat or come off camera, or come on camera, I should say?
I think she wants you to take
Okay.
her up. There you go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, you told two very compelling stories about Andrew and about your mom. Were you caring for both of them at the same time?
No. Andrew, my spouse and I, we were only supportive, to my in-laws. They were the full-time caregivers for him. We would go and spend, a week or two. But when I was in active caregiving, no, gosh, no, I wasn't doing anything. I was all for mom.
Right.
So.
Well, I think, to the point of the planning, perhaps that's something that we all need to consider in the planning, because you guys said, yeah, we'll take Andrew, but then your mom got sick. What if
different timing? My mom was first,
Correct.
Andrew was after. Yeah.
But what if that was the situation? What if everyone said, great, you'll take Andrew, we'll make that our plan, and then your mom got sick? So I think as part of our planning, we need to consider that we don't control all of the scenarios.
That's right. Yeah. What's the saying, God laughs at plans or something like that. You never know what's going to happen, right? And having backups on backups is a wonderful thing. If you're nominating guardians and nominating trustees, have alternates.
Right.
It's so important. And, and again, like if you can get their agreement in advance, that's probably a positive, because it's not good to be surprised, that, oh, you've been appointed and maybe it's not a time in your life where you really qualify to serve in that role. Yeah, that's
Right.
a great point. Yeah.
Good point.
And for my spouse and
gonna
I,
make
if we
another
had
point.
Andrew, if we had Andrew and one of us had to caregive, for someone else, we probably would have split our time, and we really did. In the time that I was caring for my mother, I didn't see my husband. I didn't see my dog. I was doing that, but I knew that he'd be there when I returned,
That's really, we're seeing more and more we call them sandwich caregivers, because you see the Gen X, generation kind of put off having kids a little bit. And so now they're raising kids, and then their parents are aging. And that's a real good point, Christine, that's something that people have to keep in the back of their mind, that can happen as well.
And Amanda made the point too, that you have to have the conversation. Don't assume that, well, I have another kid that can take care of this, without having the conversation with the other kid or the uncle, the aunt, whomever it is. And also, when you're doing the planning from a financial standpoint, sometimes having the finances to pay for the caregiving is the issue when you have the person. Other times, if there's funding for the caregiving, you still have to find the person. So it is the planning and coordination of all of that.
Amy, it looks like there's a great question from Takashi.
Yeah, so we do have a few more questions coming in. I'm going to make sure I get to them. They all get to them in the order that they came. So Mike asked, I know they mentioned the work with employers, but is it possible for individual caregivers to work with Voya?
Well, I don't know. I can start that, and Jessica and Matt jump in. So we really only work through employers right now. We have trained several of financial professionals who can help. Our company structure has changed a little bit since then. And so we have trained these folks. Christine Brookins is one of them, you see her smiling. And they, have our structure has changed. So they're with other companies now, or with another company now, but we have trained them, and they're prepared and they're experienced. So someone like Christine can help. And you can also find special needs attorneys and financial planners at, if you go to specialneedsanswers.com. That's the Association of Special Needs Professionals. Is that what it is? ASNP?
The Academy.
We just call it ASNP.
Yep, you got it.
Okay, you can get that.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great point, Karen. We, like Karen mentioned, we 95% of the business that we do is generally with institutions, so employers. We provide solutions for employers like the caregiving concierge that we talked about, as well as able accounts and other sort of financial instruments like that. But it's primarily employers, and just raising that sort of awareness in the employer space. We do a lot of thought leadership and research primarily for that audience. But the voyacares.com website is a very, very rich resource for individual consumers. There you can find resources like referrals to attorney groups that specialize in special needs planning, all the various tools that we just talked about today, the letter of intent, the various checklists. And the nice thing about it, the one thing that we continue to get good feedback on is that it's not overwhelming. It's really curated. It's made for people like all of us, right? We're in this journey. We know exactly what we need and want. So it's really there to sort of, help you in that journey. If you Google caregiving, you get 1 million results. The whole idea of our site is that it's kind of like a one-stop shop with resources that we trust. We've worked with the special needs attorney groups, and we point you to those groups and the not-for-profit organizations that we trust and we have worked with in the past. So reputable organizations and resources can be found on that site.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So we're going to go. Let's see. We have a few minutes left. I want to get to Takashi's question. What do you do when you feel lonely as a caregiver? I think not only for financial strains, but no time or physical challenges you face put you in a serious situation. Maybe that's a good question for Amanda.
Caregiving can be really lonely. Isolation is one of the hardest things. And then you've got COVID that's really kind of amplified it and poured some, gasoline on a fire. We were talking earlier about the best tools and resources for caregivers. One of the best tools and resources for caregivers is other caregivers, because we get it more than anyone else. Even if the experience is different or the diagnosis is different or the relation is different, we do have a level of empathy that I think people who haven't been through this in their life yet, they just don't understand. And so it says my internet connection is unstable, so hopefully you can hear me. But I say reaching out. When I started, there were some chat rooms and message boards, but I don't know, they weren't really quite there. But now for any diagnosis, there are specific groups for it. There are groups that grow out from there into more general. AARP has a family caregivers page on Facebook, and it's like the nicest corner of the internet. People are so supportive, but also they go on there and they say, okay, I have this problem with, a certain medical tasks, and other people will come in and say, here's what we do. And so I think that staves off loneliness, is reaching out and connecting to others who can really empathize with it.
And Amanda, just to add on what you were saying, finding resources, employee resource groups or ERGs at the workplace can also be really, really helpful. And we have a special needs and caregiver employee resource group. What's nice about it is that you can share local information. So we've got we've got these ERGs across the footprint across the country. So in Atlanta, there's one. And so you can find somebody in Atlanta, for example, that's dealing with a caregiving situation. And then you can start talking about resources and respite care and that kind of thing at a local level. I think that's very, very helpful. So I would try that. And then the other resource that I've been listening to, and I love it, and it just gives you that sense of I am not alone in this journey. There are so many, actually 56 million of us right now, right, that are dealing with this. And we're not talking about it, is this wonderful what is it called? iPod? No, what is it? What is it called? Podcast. Podcast. It's called When I'm 64, and it's about caregiving, and it's fantastic. It's about caregivers in all different types of situations. But I think, feeling that connection to what others are feeling, caregiving and that sort of loneliness is also kind of reassuring. So that's a great resource. It's called When I'm 64, and you can get it in wherever you get your podcasts.
And I'd add, don't just stop with the ERG in your workplace, because if you are working, Takashi, then look into all kinds of other benefits that as I think was mentioned earlier, employers have really stepped up during the pandemic. And so you'll find that there are probably a lot more resources that you don't even know about that are available to you, to kind of talk through your loneliness and to connect with people. So check that out.
There's some great advice in the chat going on right now as well. And I think one of the really big points there is make sure you take time to take care of yourself. And, we always use it's getting hackneyed probably at this point, but the airplane analogy of, when the oxygen mask comes down, you have to put yours on before you can help the people that are with you. And I think that's an important point for caregivers, that you often probably neglect yourself and your own needs. And so don't be shy about purposefully taking time for yourself and taking care of yourself.
I think that is just a great way to finish this with that note. Yes, always putting yourself first as much as you can, and taking care of you before you can take care of everybody else. It's an easy thing to say, but harder to do. But we will keep encouraging that and stressing that wherever we can. But we're getting down to the final minutes of our discussion today, and I wanted to thank everybody for being here. Our panelists, you've all been wonderful, and we couldn't do this without you. And thank you to our family caregivers again for coming out today and taking very, very precious time to be here, and hope that you took away a lot from today.